Yo, shout out to the Most High. It's always a high. See when we all Lord say this. L-Deez, also known Lawrence the One, for another episode of I Need to Know. And my special guest, please introduce yourself, G.
My name is Melvin Richardson, known as Teari.
Okay. So this is what we gonna do, right? I'm about to tell y'all how I met him. I was working at, Santa Rita, the jail, where we help people that's getting out of jail to better themselves. So I don't know, he was cool. I'm pretty engaged, and he was engaged, and it felt good, to match my energy and shit like that. So he said, let's walk to my car, because he had to get something out of his car, because we worked out of a big mobile home. That was our office. So on the way to the car, he said something that really messed me up in my head. He said, Lawrence, that's my car right there. That is my first car. Now, as you can see, this gentleman is a little up in age. He ain't granddaddy, super like great granddaddy old, but he's an OG. He said, this is my first car, L. And I said, how is this your first car? He said, because I just got out of jail from serving. How long?
40 years, 6 months, and 3 days.
Why don't you talk about that? Where you want to start? Do you want to start, do you want to go backwards or do you want to go forwards? You want to start from the childhood or you want to go, what you want to do?
It's up to you. Whatever suits your fancy, let's do it.
Okay, for sure. Let's start off from when you were young. Like, let's just say like when you were real young. How was your family life?
Very traumatic.
Okay.
I hail from Chicago.
Okay.
I came to California when I was 10. 1970, when I was about 9 and a half.
Oh, you're getting the mic a little bit?
I came to California when I was about 9 or 10, early 1970. And, so my childhood was what you call a standard dysfunctional family.
Okay.
I had an alcoholic father who used to beat my mother and beat myself because I didn't look like him. I came out dark-skinned, and he was light-skinned, and so that's where my troubles began.
Okay, and getting the mic a little bit more because this shit is finna get deep. You know what I'm saying? So when you say he was light-skinned, was he Steph Curry?
Not quite that light, but in that vicinity.
Gotcha. But did you see the thing about being black? You know what I'm saying? We come in all different shapes, in sizes, and colors.
Absolutely.
And there's something called a recessive gene where I might not look directly like my father, but I might look like his father. Absolutely. Or something like that. So stature-wise, did y'all have the same lineup in like size or something? Like, where did y'all meet?
Absolutely not. I've been skinny all my life until I got to the pen and started buffing iron, but I've been skinny all my life.
Gotcha. So when you were in Chicago, were you part of a gang then?
Absolutely not. The gang thing was pretty much forced on me. We'll talk about that a little bit later, but the gangs in Chicago were recruiting, but my parents were very strict with me and my brother. I had a brother that's a year older than myself, and they kept us close to home. I wasn't allowed to go around a corner without permission. I had to have a reason. So we were pretty much sheltered in that regard. So when you went to school and stuff, the gangs were there, but you really didn't hang out with them, nothing like that, because I couldn't run the streets at that time.
Were you in the projects? Were you in Cabrini Green projects?
I was born in the ghetto of South Side Chicago, but by the time I got to about 5 years old, my parents won a pinochle tournament. The black mob in Chicago, used to host a pinochle tournament. And so my parents won a pinochle tournament, and we won a house. And so we went to the working class section of the southwest side of Chicago, known as Morgan Park.
Wow, this shit is off the hook. He's the black mob. I like saying shit like that. Can I say it one more time? The black mob. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, and that's another part of our history that's pretty much not known to the general public, is that, when you talk about the mob, the first thing coming to your mind is the Godfather, the Italians. But every community, regardless of ethnicity, had an organized crime factor. And Chicago was no different. In fact, Chicago had a pretty well-organized black mob. We're starting now, the last 20 years or so, to start getting a glimpse of that. It's not something that we need to glorify or glamorize. It's a part of our history, and all of our history need to be understood. And so the black mob part is a part now that just now start to shed some light on, primarily with the movie Hoodlums and a claim it received when it first came out about Bumpy Johnson, who was one of the premier gangsters of his time in the 1920s and 30s when he went to war with the Jewish mob and had some success. And so he's still a legend to this day in New York, but what's not generally known to the general public is that the mob actually has its roots in Chicago.
Yeah,
You know?
yeah. You know what's crazy? Because like a lot of fake cities pattern themselves out of real cities. Like, so for Superman, the metropolis, you know what I'm saying, is New York. But in Batman, Gotham is based on Chicago. That's why when you watch the cartoon, it's so many mobsters. The Penguin doesn't look that far from Al Capone. I mean, he's touching down with a suit, you know what I'm saying? You know, it's real mob orientated, you know what I'm saying? So yeah, so that city is definitely patterned after Chicago. But this is what I want to know. When you were little, right? Mm-hmm. How do you guesstimate how long, like, did y'all have like gangster disciples and what's the other, vice lords back then?
You had vice lords, you had gangster disciples, you had the black disciples, you had the Four Corner Hustlers, you had the Blackstone Rangers, and later they became the Black Keystone Nation.
Yeah.
So then it became, you know, you was either folks or you were peoples, you know? And so we had, you know, like California, you know, we have the racial divide between, you know, Hispanics and the blacks, especially in Southern California, but that's not so in Chicago. Everything is based upon whether you folks or peoples in Chicago.
And does that cover all races?
Yes.
So like somebody white could be folks?
That was rare back then, just like today. It was rare when I was coming up in Southern California in the 1970s. It was rare. I'd never seen or heard of a white Crip or Blood, but today it's pretty common.
Okay.
So, and the same thing in Chicago. I'd never seen a white who was part of the gang, but now in today's era, you do have that.
Okay. So before we take this flight from Chicago to California, I just want to ask you another question before I forget. How long were those gangs in place when you were young? Like, did they already exist decades, or was it something that was brand new?
It was gangs always existed. They just called themselves different things. Like Southern California, we know the Crips and Bloods, but you know, they're descendants of someone who came before them.
Okay.
And so Chicago's the same way. There always existed gangs, but the gangs that we know in our era, you see, came about in the late 50s, early 60s.
Okay.
Yeah. So I was born in 61, so they got started a year or two before I got to the scene. Yeah.
Okay, so let's take this flight from Chicago to Los Angeles, you said?
Yes.
Okay, so what was that like? Was it a huge culture shock when you got here?
It was a major culture shock. It's some similarities and some differences. The similarities is that they're both major cities, right? And so just like we have South Chicago, Southwest, we have South Central Los Angeles, West Side LA, right? And so, but the atmosphere was different. The pace was different. It was a little bit more faster pace in Chicago, but Chicago had more, I would say, more family togetherness in terms of the community, right? I came out of Chicago when, you know, the Black Power movement was in its infancy, and we had, you know, Say It Loud, I'm Black and I'm Proud.
Yeah.
And so in Chicago, it was always somebody who was being responsible for the young folks. So I go around the corner, and let's say me and Lawrence, we were around the corner, you know, doing things we shouldn't have been doing. By the time I got home, I would have got my butt whooped and got another butt. But when I got home, because my mom would have known everything about it. You see, even though the lady who reported it didn't like my mother. That's how it was. But in California, I didn't feel that sense of community in terms of, I lived in neighborhoods where I couldn't even tell you who my neighbors were.
Was part of that because I do notice when I hear people from Chicago talk, they kind of sound like they got a Southern accent of some sort.
It's an accent. It's not a Southern accent. People say, hey, are you from the East Coast? But Chicago doesn't sit on the East Coast. Chicago is the Midwest. And so they do have an accent. And so I didn't realize what kind of accent I had until I came to California. Everybody kept telling me, you have an accent. But I think to go back to your main premise is that in Chicago, we lived in the hood.
Yeah.
All right. So we left the south side and moved to the southwest area known as Morgan Park. And so Chicago is made up of like 52, 53 different neighborhoods. And so Morgan Park is a major neighborhood in Chicago. And so it was more working class. It had some, depressed communities, but for the most part, it was more working class. Whereas when I came to Los Angeles, we lived with my uncle for the first year we came to California on the west side of Los Angeles, and it was well-to-do. Even to this day, as my understanding, it's still a pretty clean, pretty nice neighborhood. And so my point is that what few blacks did live on the west side there, in this area that I'm talking about, well, for the most part, achieved a degree of upward mobility.
Yeah.
And so it was more like, hey, I got mine, screw everybody else.
Yeah.
It's just about me, myself, and I.
Yeah.
There was no us, we, ours.
Yeah.
So there was no sense of community in that regard.
Yeah.
But even when we moved to Pomona, a year later we moved to Pomona, and it was still the same way. You didn't really have that sense of, if you didn't run with certain fellas, then you was pretty much, an oddball, so to speak,
Okay, so how did you make your transition? Like, were you getting in trouble like when you were young, like as a teenager out there in California?
Teenager, yes. Youngster, no. I excelled in school. I was good at school. School was an escape. School and church was my two escapes. It was the way to get away from my father.
Okay, so he went with you out there too?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah, I stayed with my father until we were 14. And so, like I said, they were strict, right? But at the time, you don't realize how much advantage you had. Mm-hmm. Only in retrospect now that when I look back, I can see certain opportunities that were not available to most of our kind, right? But when you're living in such a traumatic environment like my household, you tend to lose sight of the bigger picture.
Yeah.
You're so, my whole childhood existence was nothing but fear of my old man.
Okay.
And so my only escape was school and church. So I was raised in a black church. I was excellent in school, right? School was something that was really impressed upon us, as youngsters, is that school is something that you take serious. You see, and I did. I took it serious up until my teenage years when I started, meeting the Lawrences of the world. Everything drastically changed. So yeah.
Hey, that's something. They always want to blame old Lawrence. So what was your first thing that fascinated you in the game where you jumped off the porch? Was it stealing? Was it selling? Was it joining gangs? Was it girls? What was it?
It was power. It was badass, right? Having lived my entire childhood in fear. Okay. Fear when the next beating was going to come. Fear when he was going to next beat my mom, you see? That was, and I don't want to really go into too much detail unless that's where you want to go, but, in terms of what type of trauma I'm talking about, I'm not just talking about your ordinary butt whoopings, So when I say fear was an overriding factor of my childhood, I mean that literally. When we came to Pomona, we lived in what would later become a blood neighborhood of Pyrus. And so, again, we were sheltered, so we wasn't allowed to go running amok throughout the neighborhood. And so the gang influence didn't come until much later. Before I was a teenager, I looked at gangs with disgust, because they were terrorizing people, you see, and being afraid of my dad. Of course, I'm being afraid of everybody else too. So I always tried to avoid,
confrontation.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
yeah. And so the turning point, to answer your question, the turning point in my childhood came when we left the black community in Pomona, when I was entering junior high school, and we moved to a predominantly white neighborhood. And so that became a whole nother set of traumatic experiences that added to the traumatic experiences of my childhood with my father. And I mean, with white folks is what I'm referring to. And so we moved into a community that did not accept us. I lived in a family where I was not accepted. From the time I was born, my father rejected me because I was blessed with having, melanated skin. And so when I moved to the predominantly white neighborhood, I'm again confronted with, what you would say the disadvantages of having melanated skin, you see. And so the fear was not that we were rejected, it was about how we were rejected. For example, I was kidnapped, I was molested, I was stabbed and left for dead. They tried to burn our house down. They burned a cross on our yard. Now, all of this, the majority of this happened after my parents divorced after I was 14 because we had no protection in the house.
Oh.
You see? So it was my brother and I, and, I was scared of my own shadow at that time.
Yeah.
And so I was framed and sent to a boys' home and to camp for something I didn't do. And it was there that I met, all the cats that I had been trying to avoid.
Oh,
you see?
Yeah.
And so when it became known that I grew up in a blood neighborhood,
yeah,
it was pretty much, either you're going to represent that or you're going to be the lone sheep who's going to be devoured by the wolves. So that's when I became a gangbanger.
Okay. So what year is this?
This is 1976.
Okay. 1976. Mm-hmm. Damn, I wasn't even born yet. You know what I'm saying? Damn. I mean, a motherfucker been thugging before we, you know what I'm saying?
now remember, my 1 year in Los Angeles,
okay,
I was able to make friends with guys who ultimately became major players in, what we now know as Crips. It wasn't called Crips when I was in Los Angeles in 1970. It was called Crib. And later on...
Crib, C-R-I-B?
Yeah, that was the original name that they were calling themselves when I was there. And so some of the cats I ran with, Joe Bible on them, they were West Side Baby Cribs.
Okay.
A few years later, it went into Crib.
Okay.
Right? And so by the time I get to camp and stuff,
yeah,
I'm pretty much known by a lot of Crips who were friends with me.
Yeah.
But once it became known that I lived in a blood, what was known as a blood neighborhood, then, I had a choice. Either you're going to, get devoured by these wolves, or you're going to, you're going to find some safety net and, find some protection. That's what I did. So I became a blood.
So if I heard you right, the people that you grew up with was Cribs or Crips, mm-hmm. right? That you knew, but your neighborhood is blood for strangers. Yes. So in a sense, you had to choose between the people that you've been knowing for the other side of town versus your neighborhood.
Absolutely.
In retrospect, would have been a hard option? Like, what do you think would have been like, because you had been a Crip, like, in retrospect, do you think that you should have went that route?
Only when I got to prison was those guys were in prison when I got there. And
when you say those guys, you mean the Crips?
The Crips.
Okay.
Yes. As well, we say Crips.
Crips.
For the sake of clarity. And there's some major cats in the prison. And they remembered me from my early years in Los Angeles. And so it's like, hey, come on this way. But by that time, I was too far gone with the blood stuff then, So, so that was not an option. So when you look back on it now, and I can easily sit back here in retrospect and say, well, I could have went this way, I could have went that way. But when the shit hits the fan, it's about survival. And so when those survival instincts come in, it's not always the right choice. It's not always the best choice. It's the choice at that time that was going to provide the best, means of security for me. And when you enter juvenile hall, I mean, some of the juvenile halls and juvenile facilities are far more brutal than any prison I ever been in.
Explain that.
You have, I mean, when you're young like that, you're really trying to make a name for yourself, right? And so my first, witnessing of rapes, it's not in prison, it was in juvenile hall, you see? So my first gang wars that I've seen, I mean, you do see those on the streets, you do participate in those on the streets, but again, since I didn't start my gangbang until I got to juvenile hall, then, for me, my first experience with the gang warfare was in jail, in juvenile hall.
Okay. See? Say that one more time in the mic.
Yeah. So when you first become involved with gang warfare, normally you're on the streets.
Yeah.
But for me, mine was in jail in juvenile hall. So juvenile hall was an eye opener for me. It was it changed my life completely. I did 11 months in camp in Boys Ranch, and by the time I came out, I was cold-blooded.
Okay.
I was a cold-blooded killer.
So after you got out of juvenile hall, you came home?
Yes.
Okay.
No, after I got out, I went from juvenile hall, I went to camp, and I went to a Boys Ranch.
Okay.
Yeah. So when I got out of there, now it's time for revenge.
So did you still keep in touch with your father during this time?
No, by the time I went to jail, we had already left him.
Okay.
We left him 2 times earlier, but a black woman in the early and mid 70s with 4 children, barely making minimum wage at the phone company, it just wasn't doable. And so we had to keep going back just for no other purpose, for economic. We had to keep going back to my father. And so I was getting one of his little famous ass whippings one time, and I decided, well, this guy's going to kill me. And I'm sick and tired of getting beat with this, I don't know if y'all know what a cat nine strap is. Y'all may be too young to know what that is. But a cat nine strap was a leather strap that they cut in strips. That's what they used to whip the horses with. And so I had the full strap that the old barbers used to use to sharpen they straight razors on. And so that's what I used to get beat with, right? And so there was no requirements legally for schools or any other institution to report evidence of child abuse. So I used to go to school with black, and when I say black and blue and purple bruises over my whole body.
Yeah.
You see? And so not one teacher ever cared or even reported it.
Yeah.
So things have changed for the better in that regard.
Yeah, we get a train homage. Yo, shout out to the train, you know what I'm saying? That's what makes it authentic.
Yeah.
You can't buy that train sound.
No,
that ain't no sound effect.
No, that's authentic. and so anyway, my father was beating me one day, and I just couldn't take it. My body was already tender from the last beating I got, and I was still having a lot of nightmares and stuff. When I was around 7, my dad tried to circumcise me. You see. And they had to rush me to the hospital and all that stuff there, you see. So this is the type of trauma, the type of fear that I'm speaking about. And I have to mention that part because it's going to give you an idea of what my mindset was when I tell you what I did next. So during this particular ass whooping, I was 14 years old, and I decided this guy's going to kill me, so it's either, now mind you, it was not something I thought about ever. It's something that just happened.
Yeah.
Just one day I bust out of the room, I got away from him, and by the time he caught up to me, I was in the kitchen with a butcher knife, and I'm like, it's either you or me, And so he was quite taken aback by that, and so he gave me an ultimatum. You think you're a man now? You want to stand up for yourself. You think you can make it on your own? Well, hit the door, right? Either you hit the door and don't come back, or you take your ass in that room and continue taking his ass whooping. I hit the door, and I was gone for about a month. I lived on the streets of Pomona and Hollywood.
Yeah.
And so by the time we came back, we moved away from him, and that's when the whites started attacking. That's when the cross burnings and tried to burn the house down.
Yeah.
That's when all that took effect.
Yeah.
See? And so when I went to jail and came back out, now I've hardened my mind and turned it to steel. And I became a cold-blooded killer.
Yeah.
Anybody that remotely reminded me of, now I know it's my dad.
Yeah.
Or anybody who reminded me of those white guys that used to terrorize me and my family, I enacted revenge. You see? So the gangs were my redeemers.
Yeah.
Okay? I can separate my indoctrination from what we now know today, drive-bys, killing people in front of their mamas, that's not my generation. Every generation has to have their own identity and have their own code of ethics, so to speak. And so for me and my generation, right, the gangs were my saving grace. And I say that, again, not to glorify or to in any way promote that type of lifestyle. It's that when you've been kicked around and abused and misused for so long like I had, when I got to jail, I seen the power of these gangs, you see? And so by my association and affiliation with them, I was able to redeem my own cowardice. And what I mean by that, when I'm rational, I could tell you, I was a little child. But no child should have to live with that type of fear. Yeah. And so the gangs taught me how to make other people fear you. You see? And I cannot tell you the power I felt the first time I stabbed somebody, the first time I shot somebody. It was liberating. You see? Because once you begin to associate with these type of people, then you begin to look back at your childhood and say, damn, what took me so long to grab that knife? You see? Why did I not have that courage years earlier to protect my mother? Why was I not, courageous enough to protect my family from the terroristic campaign of these whites who didn't want us in the neighborhood? You see? So when I say that these gangs restored my pride, restored my manhood, so to speak, I mean that literally. Yeah. You see, now, when I look back on it, was it the right thing to do? No. But, we at that time, we lived by the saying, two wrongs don't make it right, but a damn show makes it even. And that was my philosophy. And I damn sure tried to make it even.
I never heard that one, but I definitely just downloaded that one. Yeah. So it sounded to me like you saying that gangs weren't bad, the energy just was in the wrong direction.
There's nothing completely inherently good or bad.
Okay.
Right? So the same thing with our conversation a little bit earlier regarding the black mob, right? Or any type of organized crime. There's good and bad. If you go back to the movie Hoodlums, where, Bumpy Johnson, when he started, gaining his rise to power, they established the first black banks in Harlem.
Damn, didn't know that.
You see?
You knew that, S?
Yeah. The first black banks was created by the black mob.
Okay.
Right? Senior citizen facilities was created by the black mob. Playgrounds for black children was created by the black mob.
Okay.
You see? So they ran the numbers game. Just like today, it's okay if you go and spend all your money on the scratchers.
Yeah.
You see? You go and play the lottery. It's perfectly okay. It's perfectly legal. Well, the gangsters are the one who introduced that. The black gangsters in Chicago came out with the numbers game. You see? And it's no coincidence why the state of Illinois became the first to legalize lottery.
Yeah.
Because they had struggled for so many years to try to suppress the black mobs from all the millions they were making with, the numbers game.
Yeah.
See? And so my point that I'm making is that, we have to be careful because we know that there are people who may be impressionable to gangs and to gangsters and organized crime and things. This and that. So it comes with responsibility. But our history is our history, and we have to be proactive in knowing all of our history.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so this part is a part of our history that we need to understand, we need to analyze, we need to study it, because we cannot end what we see as the senseless black on black violence if we don't understand, its history and its roots.
Yeah.
See? And so that's what my goal is. And I'm also explaining this here to you so you can understand me better.
Definitely. So when you were a blood, you went to the penitentiary as a blood too, right?
So I have to make this clarification. I was a Piru. I was a Pomona Islands Piru. Now, the Pirus don't no longer consider themselves bloods anymore. So everything has changed from my generation to the current generation now. Things are kind of convoluted there. So it wouldn't be not historically accurate now today to say, blood today for Piru. I was a Piru.
Okay.
Which then was bloods, but they're not bloods today. So yes, I was a Piru.
Okay, so didn't you did you at one point separate from being a blood to like Black Guerrilla family?
Okay, so let's go back to when I got out of camp, and let's work our way to the prison. So because one is just like the gang culture, it goes in stages.
Yeah.
So do criminality, right? So it's about influences, all right? And so when I got out, I was Piru'd out the game. And so the older Piru, his sister was a famous singer, and he was like, "Hey man, time out on this gang stuff, man." He was 27, I was 16. He was like, "Hey man, I got nothing but love for you. I got nothing respect for you. You got mad hard and you're serious about yours, and it's do or die. I respect that, but listen, your family is not safe. Your first obligation is to make sure your family is safe, right? These guys in the neighborhood, when I got out of the camp, there were more blacks who had moved in.
Yeah.
There was no one when I was there. Maybe one or two further up, but that was it. And so when I come out now, there's a sizable number of blacks now. Some were Crips, some were Bloods. And so he said, "Man, you guys have got to unite around the common theme of, protection of family first. If that means you got to, unite with your enemy to do that, that's what you got to do." So this guy had a lot of influence on me, and so I went to a couple of Crips that I was, banging against, and we all agreed, "Hey man, we gotta, everybody's getting out of control." So that's when I stopped gang banging. Now, I established my own neighborhood. Today, it's a Crip neighborhood.
Yeah.
A few of us were Bloods. It was about 8 of us. 3 of us were Bloods. About 5 were Crips. along the way in the 80s, it became all Crips now, right? And so when I got to prison, you know, I killed somebody from my own neighborhood, the neighborhood that I started, right? And so there was reasons that I felt were legit at the time, but in retrospect, you know, there's no justifiable reason for taking a life. But in my thinking at the time, when I came to prison, it was race wars going on.
Yeah.
Which it didn't take too much psychological adjustments for me as it did other people. Now, if you're blood and you're a Crip and you used to fight each other, that's one thing. But when you got to go fight another race, it's a whole different psychological dimension.
In what aspect?
It's that if it has been drilled into your head from the time, and some of these guys been gangbanging from the time they could walk.
Yeah.
See, I was a late bloomer.
Yeah.
It wasn't until I went to jail. Other guys, they're raised in it. Mm-hmm. So, for some, it's generational, right? And so if it's drilled into your head that your enemy looks like you.
Yeah.
If he got a different color rag on, that's your enemy. So psychologically, you're geared towards
killing yourself.
Yes. So when another race, someone who doesn't look like you, becomes the enemy, you don't see it that way. You still see, no, that's my enemy. I'm not going to be distracted with this over here. That's my enemy.
Damn.
You see? For me, because I was already at war with the whites,
yeah,
it was it's just a continuation of what I was already doing anyway.
Yeah.
You understand what I'm saying? So I was able to make a name for myself. Let me go back a ways. I was 18 years old, just turned 18 years old, and I was charged with first-degree premeditated murder of lying in wait for killing my homeboy. Right? And so the first ones to take the stand on me was my homeboys. And so I cannot tell you the psychological devastation that was. When you have no identity other than that of your homeboys, you know, to be betrayed like that is like, you know, you don't ever get over that. And so for me, it was like, man, you know, I had life without the possibility of parole. I was 18 years old facing the death penalty. Because of my young age and without a prior adult conviction, they gave me life without the possibility of parole, which means I would never get out of prison. I would die in prison. And so what's left in is either I'm going to wither away or I'm going to make a name for myself. So I said, I'm going to make a name for myself. I want a big reputation. I want to put my neighborhood on the map. Doesn't matter that my homeboy just told on me. I'm still representing my neighborhood. My neighborhood was one of the last neighborhoods of my era when I was on the streets to get started. So we had to do things to constantly try to get a reputation for ourselves. And so I had no problem whatsoever with going to war with the whites. We had the Nazis, we had the Aryan Brotherhood, you see, and I was not having no type of disrespect, no way, no how, right? And so I committed to doing everything I could to get a name for myself. Mm-hmm. In prison, you get a reputation by how many people you stab or kill. Nobody cares how good you can fight. You can be Mike Tyson. When you go into prison, nobody give a fuck about how good you can fight. It's about how many people you done destroyed. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And so I had no problem with stabbing people. You see? So that's how I got introduced to the Black Guerrilla family. I wanted to kill white boys. The only one I seen on the front line and putting work in was them. So that's why I gravitated to the Black Guerrilla family. Now, once I became a member, I began to see that it was more to just killing white boys, and and they're revolutionaries, they're communists, they want to overthrow the government, and so this became a whole different ball game, so to speak, for me.
Yeah.
But that's not why I joined. I joined solely because he was killing white boys. I'm just keeping it real. You know what I mean? And so that's what really ended the game banging, and then started my political conversion to radical, politics or what have you.
Now, I remember one time we was talking, right, when you said that at some point in time did you end up becoming good friends with one of the guys that was white? You had an arch rival that y'all end up being all right with later on?
So the prison when I entered prison was this here. You had the Mexican Mafia, which controlled the Hispanics from Southern California. You had the Nuestra Familia, which means our family in Spanish, who controlled the Hispanics from Northern California. You had the Black Guerrilla family. You had the Crips. You had the Bloods. And then you had, for the whites, you had some Klan, but you had, for the most part, you had Aryan Brotherhood and the American Nazis. Skinheads came later on. And so the Aryan Brotherhood was the most fierce of the white groups. And so, we went to war. And so, I was charged and later exonerated for, the death of a white inmate when I was in the reception center. Come a little closer real quick. When I was in the reception center. And so by the time I entered prison, I had a bounty on my head. I was a wanted man from the Aryan Brotherhood. And so there began our war with the Black Guerrilla family. Now, they had already had a history. The Black Guerrilla family has this antecedents back in 1969, and the Aryan Brotherhood started a few years after that. And so they were bitter enemies. Well, I was in the adjustment center. We shared the security housing unit with the death row inmates. And so the leader of the Aryan Brotherhood, for whatever his own personal reasons were, decided to call it quits with the Aryan Brotherhood. And he was, they had a 3-man leadership for the Aryan Brotherhood, and he was one of the 3. And I wanted to kill this dude so bad. He was
Damn.
He was a soldier. I mean, I respect him as a soldier,
Every time I hear a story like this, it reminds me of Magic and Bird, but on a way different level. But keep going.
Same thing, but remember, sports is warfare acted out non-violently.
Yeah.
But it's still war.
Yeah.
Believe that.
Okay.
If you don't believe me, ask anybody who saw, Larry Holmes fight, Looney Cooney or somebody, the great white hope. It's always a great white hope, when they think of somebody that can defeat a brother,
Yeah.
And so this is no different. It's just, it's life and death here, Bird and Magic go out for a beer afterwards here. And that's so, so yeah. So anyway, this white leader called it quits.
Shit. My bad. Every time that happened one time in interview, man, I'm just a silly motherfucker, man, trying to do my job. But keep going.
So when he called it quits, he exposed a plot that the Aryan Brotherhood, well, it was actually the Mexican Mafia plot, but the Mexican Mafia wanted me dead. I had what we call in prison put work in, to the extent where I was a wanted man by the Aryan Brotherhood, by the Mexican Mafia. The racist cops was trying to kill me. And so the Aryan Brotherhood always had good relations with the white racist guards, and they would always bring them weapons to use against us. And so they were able to get in snub-nosed .22 revolver with the bullets. And they loaned it to the Mexican Mafia, who was supposed to use it to shoot me. And this is in the security housing where everywhere you go, you're in hand restraints. And so the Aryan Brotherhood agreed to take the hit for the Mexican Mafia. And so this guy, this leader who called it quits, revealed to the administration the plot to assassinate me and another high-ranking BGF official. And as a result, they called in the National Guards to San Quentin in 1983 and rushed the adjustment center and recovered they had 2 handguns. They had a homemade handgun and they had a .22 revolver. And so years later, they started a new program for long-term inmates, lifers, to become drug counselors to assist the drug counselors that were contracted by the Department of Corrections to provide drug treatment to the inmate population. And so I became one of the candidates into this program along with him. And so we went through drug counseling, training in school together, and we graduated together and became good friends.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's dope. So how did you get out of jail?
Woo! Man, I still ask myself that every day. I've been out since June 11th. I walked out, and it was, again, I had life without the possibility of parole for the first 9 years of my prison incarceration. I kept fighting it, because I knew there's not a black Hispanic in the state unless he just get caught dead bang who wasn't railroaded in some way, shape, form, or fashion. That does not mean I was not guilty for the crime for which I stood convicted. What it means is that the state, in my opinion, did not prove beyond a reasonable doubt, as the law states, that I was guilty. And so I kept fighting it. And so I was able to get it reduced to life without the possibility of parole to 25 years to life. And so that means I was eligible to go to the parole board. And so for years, over 20 years, I battled the California Parole Board because they're not just looking at what my commitment offense was. Was it egregious? Yes. Was I guilty? Yes. But, at what point does redemption and reform and rehabilitation take hold?
Yeah.
And so finally I was able to get a commissioner, former cop from San Diego County, who didn't look at my history in prison. That's what kept me in prison for so long, was my history in prison. All of these wars and stuff that and all the work I put in to get that reputation for myself. I got it, but at a very heavy price. I don't regret, what I did. I'm not proud of it today because all life has meaning, all life has value, and nobody has a right to take a life because they're angry or don't like somebody,
Yeah.
And so I can stand on that. But at the time of my, entering prison, I achieved what I set out to do, and that was to, put my neighborhood on the map and to give a big reputation for myself. The only problem was that once you become identified as a killer, a cold-blooded killer, you're kind of lonely because you don't have no friends because nobody trusts you.
Yeah.
And so now I have to go and stand before, people who only looking at what have I done since I've been in prison. And they don't forget, And people always thought when I got denied I was bitter and stuff. I didn't. I was never naive about it. I knew it is what it is. I can't change the past. The only thing I can do is change me. And I felt I did that to the extent that I earned, my freedom. And eventually I had a parole panel that, saw it for what it was.
Yeah. So I'm going to ask a stupid question. What was that feeling like?
Disbelief, relief. Even when the parole board says, we find you suitable for parole, you're no longer a threat to society, you still know that the governor could pull it. You see, the governor still has the legal authority to rescind a parole grant if he finds evidence that he believes that you're still a threat.
Yeah.
So it was a short temporary relief, because now you got to, prepare for the the governor's action. But once I walked out that gate, it was like, it's just like, there's no words to describe that.
Yeah.
And so I was prepared. A lot of people are not prepared. I was prepared to leave prison. And what I mean by that is that, I've rose into the highest levels of the prison hierarchy in terms of the gang leadership. And I've had more money probably than most people ever make in their lifetime. You see, not in my own hands, but I controlled it. I had a war machine that most people only dream about in terms of, sending cadres out to kill people and tear some shit up and, rob some shit, And so I decided, I played the game, I'm going to fake it till I make it, for a long time. The hardest thing for me to do in terms of my rehabilitation, if that's what you want to call it, reform or whatever you want to say, was to acknowledge and take full responsibility for the death of my homeboy.
Yeah.
For years, I blamed him for my situation. He punked the game. He violated the code. He made me kill him. I mean, to the average citizen, that sounds, man, that's some cold-blooded shit. That's how it is. That's the street code. That's the gang code. You see? And so my position was that, hey, had I been on the other end doing the things that he did, he would have killed me too. So what's the problem? Okay, people see that he made me do that. I mean, that was my stance. So the hardest thing for me to do in my transition, if you will, was to accept full and total responsibility for this murder.
Gotcha.
You see? And so when I got out, all the homies hit me up on Facebook. People show me how to get online. And the first thing I did was to apologize to everybody who was affected by my crime, all of my homeboys. Hey, man, welcome up, man. I think you're going to ever get out, man, and blah, blah, blah. Hey, man, look, let me tell you something. I'm sorry. What you got to be sorry for, man? And I explained to them, no matter what we tell ourselves, we can tell ourselves, we make ourselves believe anything.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? R. Kelly said, I believe I can fly.
Yeah.
That fool probably really thought he could fly. He don't think that now, though, because he can't fly about that cell now. But, you know what I mean? But we can make ourselves believe anything. Yeah. You see? And so, for me, when we have to take these 12-step, programs. And so, one of them is making amends. Making amends.
I think that's the fourth step, maybe.
You see? Yeah. And so, that's taking fearless more inventory, When you get to making amends, when possible, that was for me, that was something I voluntarily did because I want people to know. I had a reputation when I caught this case. There wasn't very many murders in Pomona. Pomona's about 20 miles east of Los Angeles. And so, the 80s came with the Uzis and AKs, and so the murder rate, they used to call Pomona Little L.A. But at the time I grew up, there wasn't that very many murders, and so mine really stood out. And then the cold-blooded nature in which I killed my homeboy, people that was into the street life or the gang life, they were quite impressed with that. So I had a reputation, what I'm saying. I had a status, right, for killing somebody. And so I continued that when I went to prison, putting the work in to get a reputation for myself, you see? And so now I have to try to undo that, right? I don't want to be recognized as a killer. In prison, they get some great events being known as a killer.
Yeah. You
know what I'm saying? You keep people at bay, you see? And you make people fear you. And that's what gangs are all about. Gangs is about prestige. And the only way to gain prestige, you have to make people feel you and fear you, right? And I did that. But at a terrible, terrible price to my humanity. You see? So it was important for me when I walked out of those gates for people to see me in a whole different light. You see? I'm about family now. I'm about community. I'm about, self-help, all those things now. You see? And so that's what I want my legacy to be. And so for me, the first thing I did when I walked out of the door is like, now I can try to make this right.
Okay.
Yeah.
For sure. Well, you know what I'm saying? That's a great story. You know what I'm saying? I'm glad you came out. Do you want to put your name out there or something like that?
My name is Melvin Richardson. Everybody knows me in prison as Teari. Teari means spilled blood in Swahili, so I don't really, I don't really wear that too much no more. I really don't like the name Melvin because I'm a junior.
Yeah.
And as much as I forgave my father, I still don't want this name.
Okay. Well, you got him on Facebook, and I am Lawrence, the one, also known L-Deez, for another episode of I Need to Know in Amani and Dougal. And as usual, come on, you know what I want.